would like to open the stage for our very wonderful speaker today, Siobhan John. Siobhan is a well-being strategist and a mental health advocate. Her work is focused on making well-being a foundational metric for success with the businesses and the entrepreneurs that she works with. Her insights on the subject have been featured on air on CBC and published on the Globe and Mail, Forbes, Fast Company, and much more. Siobhan also serves on the board of directors for Taking It Global and is the founder of Lightwork, which is a consultancy that shines a light on the heavyweights impacting our well-being. Siobhan, we are so lucky to have you here to facilitate this workshop, and I flip the mic over to you to begin.
Great. Thank you, Alina. Thank you for the warm welcome and the invitation to join the Y Space community today. I'm just really thrilled to be here with all of you today. Reading and hearing your bio is always very strange. But the things outside of the bio is I am also an entrepreneur, very much a very passionate mental health advocate, and someone who lives with depression as well too. So doing sessions like this are very meaningful to myself. And just the practice of caring for our well-being is something that's extremely important. I think there's not been a time that at least I can remember that we have not had so many different things impacting our well-being at this moment. And I know as business owners, there's like lots of different pressures and stress and different things. And as Alina mentioned at the top of the hour, that we don't always have spaces as founders and business owners to talk about how we're feeling, to talk about just the different things that come with running a business. There's been some research and studies have shown that there's still just even stigma of even admitting when you're having different challenges. So I think that it's very wonderful that communities like this exist to not only learn how to grow, create, and scale your business, but also communities of care where we can support one another with what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, having spaces to talk about what it means to cultivate and focus on our well-being. And my hope today is to just share a little bit about why it's important as entrepreneurs to focus on our well-being, what are some of the challenges that might come up, and then also have an opportunity to not only just share a couple of practices, because as we know, when it comes to taking care of ourselves, it's very much a journey that will all individually be on. Different things will work for different people, but there's also a great power in being in community and learning from each other as well. So my hope is that we'll have some opportunity for us to, share what's working. What are some things that are working that we want to offer to the rest of the collective and community, and maybe even to share if there's things we're challenged with that maybe we can support with as well too. So with that, I will share my screen and we can get started. Okay. Can folks see my screen? All right, amazing. Okay, so Alina, I know you're going to look at the chat because I won't be able to see it right now, but we'll just get started. So I've already done my little preamble and my intro. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our session roadmap for today. So there's a couple of things that we'll walk through. First is the reality of entrepreneurship and mental health. So I want to walk through a couple of interesting stats that have been shared by BDC. They've been doing some really great work about looking at mental health and the intersection of mental health and well-being and entrepreneurship, and what are some of the things that we tend to come up against when we are building our businesses. Also, just unpacking what are some of those challenges, what are the things that contribute to the stress that we might feel. And it's by no means an exhaustive list, but it'll be just kind of a high level of some of the common things that we might come up against as we are on this journey of building and scaling and creating new things. Then we'll talk a little bit about the practice for caring for our mental health, and very much emphasis on a practice. It's definitely something that we will try on at many various points in our lives. There are different practices that will work for us. And then we find out things, things transition and change, and we need to put on new practices or try new practices and tools. So we'll talk a little bit about some common practices that we can take from a holistic perspective in terms of our caring for our mind, our body, our actual spirit and meaning, and actually practices that can help with community. And also some things that when we're actually overwhelmed, because like in the moment when things happen and you can't drive to the class or the different thing that that is your sort of your oasis, like what are some grounding things that we can do in those moments when we're feeling overwhelmed and maybe feeling a little bit dysregulated. And then lastly, hopefully we'll have some time as well to do like some collective resource sharing. So we'll have an opportunity just to do a quick exercise together where we can kind of share some different tools and practices. And throughout the presentation, I'm hoping that with a topic like this, mental health, it's such a very wide and can be sometimes a bit of a heavy topic as well too. So I really encourage everyone to just be mindful of your own emotional capacity. Today is not about focusing in on things that are meant to focus on things that might be too emotionally distressing. But I do recognize that we're in a time that is very, very challenging and hard. So I want to be mindful of that. We're also, depending on where we are, it might be the end of the day, it might be the beginning of the day for you. So I want for us to just take a moment. I'll have a practice shortly for us to just arrive, just to kind of sit in and settle in. But want you to make sure that, even when we have opportunities, even for myself, just talking about wellness, there's things where it's like, this is like a lot, or it reminds me of a time that might have been challenging. So just be mindful of your emotional capacity. Use what you, I'd also encourage you, we'll have opportunities, to engage within the chat. We'll have specific questions that I might call out, but as well, participate where it makes sense for you. Same with, cameras off. I'm good with like the fact of everyone be mindful of your capacity right now. And that's really what's most important for the session for today. Okay, so let's take a moment to arrive. So as of right now, live, it's about 6:15. Folks were watching, who might be watching the recording tomorrow. Not sure what time it'll look like for you, but I know we're all just lots of stuff. So maybe this is the end of your workday. Maybe you had a whole lots of stuff going on. You came in, you rushed into this class. Maybe you have some other things to do after this class. I do. So let's just take a moment to just arrive. If you feel comfortable, if you want to take a deep breath, ground into your chair, and maybe just what are 1 or 2 words to describe how you're feeling right now. Maybe even like if you wanted to even describe the state of your heart rate, if that's something, you can just pop those into the chat. And there's no judgment, there's no right or wrong feeling, but just like, how are you feeling right now? How are you feeling today? So we'll just take that moment. Just want to have a grounding. So I know 6 o'clock is usually a time where we're thinking of this other stuff, and I can't see the chat, Alina. So if you want to maybe share a couple things if things are coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Interested, optimistic, fine, overwhelmed, tired but eager, that was me. Cold, exhausted, thankful, tired, thankful, enthusiastic, and appreciated, and good. And then Victor says it's midnight for him.
Wow. Okay. So thank you for coming. Good night. So I hope that rest is coming soon. But thank you for being here. And thank you to everyone for just sharing. Honestly, I'm feeling a mix of all of those things too. I'm grateful, a bit tired, hence, a little extra light help with that. I for the exhaustion, yeah, I feel that. I think there's a collective exhaustion. I don't know if that's just, I think that's just in the air right now. But I wanted to, just provide that opportunity for us to just sometimes take a moment, because we can go through an entire day and not even just have an opportunity to check in with ourselves. We might ask other people how they're doing today, what are they doing? And if we're, if you're a business owner, you're thinking about, your customers, other folks, maybe your team. But it's also great to just take a minute to arrive, and getting in that habit of doing that periodically throughout the day. Top of the day, midday, end day is just a good practice. So thank you so much for just, giving yourself that space to do so. So for overall, when we think about things being hard, and if there's kind of that feeling and that underlying feeling, especially of it being hard, we're not alone in feeling that, especially when I think about being entrepreneurs. And here I want to talk a little bit about just kind of some, stats and things that are related to entrepreneurship, that are pretty common, unfortunately, in terms of how it can be very challenging and taxing on our overall and mental wellness and well-being. So, as the BDC, which is the Business Development Bank of Canada, for the last couple of years has been doing a lot of research into the space of not only supporting entrepreneurs with like financial resources, but also looking at our overall mental health and well-being. And they've been doing surveys over the last couple of years, but last year specifically, they had a recent survey that kind of shared that nearly half, so 45% of Canadian business owners feel mental health challenges on a regular basis. And I think an interesting stat about this is that this is increased from 38% compared to last year. So as we know, over the last year, things like inflation, higher stress have continued to really provide an additional pressure. And this is not even, taking into account other different stressors and global volatility that we've also been encountering as well too. So I think when it comes to like starting and running a business, it can feel like riding an emotional roller coaster. And I love this meme because I think it really brings home just like being on that ride. Like you're excited at first, and when you get on, it's just a whole different story. Right. So when we're, as entrepreneurs or anyone who's like starting something new or creative, there are peaks and valleys that alternate between like high pressure, stress, uncertainty. There's also excitement in there as well too. But, just those emotional peaks can create some strain sometimes, especially when we have to, balance being there for our customers, our team members, if we have our team, and being able to kind of like create something, scale something, and figure out a lot of times things as we're going. So this was an interesting graphic that I think really kind of drives home as well too, kind of the emotional journey. So it's kind of the emotional journey in this case of creating something great. So just to kind of walk through like and I kind of think of this graphic very similar to like the iceberg effect. If you've ever seen like those graphics that sort of show the iceberg, which is like the big aspects of things we see, but underneath there's all these things happening beneath the surface. So above, in this particular graphic, we have like what outsiders see, or what 99% in this case might see. So all of the things like starting the business, like the wins, the accolades, the really interesting things that maybe we might choose to share, maybe great big wins or accomplishments. But underneath, there's usually lots of like mental chatter that might be happening behind the scenes. So like first starting like the initial excitement, maybe a little bit of just like, realization of like, hey, this is a bit more challenging. Might be running up again with like, hey, there's like a bit of doubt that I might be having, and realizing, oh, okay, this is, very, very hard, much harder than I thought. And there's also sometimes the valley, right? Of just like, hey, this is really hard. And like, this is the part where, sometimes it just doesn't feel so great. Like it can feel very isolating. It can feel very, yeah, you might be not feeling like, there's like imposter syndrome, all these different things. But, when it comes, with like resilience and with perseverance, community, different things and support, we are able to kind of like, pull our, to be able to transcend sort of out of that valley and being able to see like, hey, I'm still working on things. Like I can still do this. I can continue to keep working. But essentially what this is trying to show is like that emotional roller coaster. We often think that, or it's presented, from society perspective, that things are kind of like like climbing a ladder is a perfect example of the metaphor. But it's not really, it's more of like a jungle gym of like kind of moving different around, kind of going up, sometimes even falling off the jungle gym, getting back on. And with that, it's all very normal, but it can come with a lot of like emotional ups and downs. So a couple of other stats that I wanted to share from the BDC survey that I thought were interesting of note is that there's been also different studies that have reported that entrepreneurs often report higher levels of like mental health challenges compared to the general population. And there's like lots of different kind of hypothesis about that in terms of just being more like high performers, just having like a lot of just very high expectations, all of these different things that make folks a bit more prone to feeling feeling more challenged in terms of the work that they're doing. So in this survey from BDC, it kind of mentioned that at least once a week, business owners have reported feeling either having low energy or little to low energy, feeling depressed in that they accomplish less than they'd like to have accomplished, feeling mental health challenges or needs, or feeling that those challenges that they're having are actually having an impact on their ability to work. It also went into a bit of other additional information that I thought was really interesting as well too, that showed that mental health challenges are more likely to be mentioned by women. So there was one study that found that the workload among entrepreneurial women accounted to 3 full-time jobs, while their pay only reflected 50% of one of the jobs. Younger entrepreneurs as well. So in this survey, they count that as folks who are under the age of 45 or have a less mature business. Members of diversity groups. So within the survey, they've counted folks like persons with disabilities are more likely to report extreme levels of stress. And those folks whose businesses are not profitable adds an extra layer of stress and pressure to how we're feeling. So I'm gonna talk a little bit now about like what are some of the like challenges, like what are some of the things that might be contributing to a trigger or a stressor that might be on our mental health. And then I'll also open it up to kind of also hear from you in terms of what are some things that are, stressors and strains. So the first one is like hustle culture, right? So this is something that is very much a pervasive part of our society in terms of like the relentless pursuit of productivity, success, very much about making sure, or kind of the belief that our inherent value is very much based on how hard we're working, how productive we are. And those types of beliefs and that sort of pattern can perpetrate the belief that our worthiness is only based on how much we're doing, how successful we are, right? And if we are, so it basically creates and perpetuates the belief that we always have to be hustling and striving and very productive and producing in order to be successful. But the impact with that is that having that internalized belief is that it very much creates this belief that our businesses are only, or we are only as successful as our businesses. So if things aren't going well, we as a person are not, enough, or that we're a failure, or that it creates the belief that it's very difficult to rest because you should be working much harder. Like if you are a successful business owner, if you want it bad enough, you should be working really hard. You shouldn't be resting. You shouldn't be tired. All of these different things. So it can create, having this it can essentially create the environment to have like very like looser boundaries between like work and home, work and rest, and feeling like it's very challenging for you to do so. Another thing that has been cited as like a stressor or challenge or can impact our mental health is isolation and loneliness. So like running a business or creating a business can feel like a very isolating experience. So like I think the fact that Y Space is a great example of a organization or a program that is helping to combat the feeling of isolation as a business owner, because it can be a very isolating experience to work on something that you're very passionate about, that a lot of times you are, building from the ground up, bootstrapping in many cases, and feeling like, no one else really understands what you're going through or understands the challenges that you might be having. And research has shown that like loneliness can be as bad as smoking, bad for your health as smoking. It can create a very significant impact on our physical and our mental well-being. And because it impacts essentially from a brain perspective, the parts of our brain that are responsible for like executive functioning, right? So as business owners, our ability to like make decisions and feel engaged is like super important. It's a very vital to the like what we do. So if we're having these feelings of severe isolation and loneliness, it kind of degrades our ability to make decisions, to feel like that we can function at the best. And in severe cases, it can lead to feelings of depression, can impact our sleep. And it's also important to know that as a human beings, we have like an innate desire to want to connect with other people. So when we have that sort of not present in our lives, it can create, a lot of, strain on our well-being. Next one is feelings of scarcity. So very much like similar to loneliness, feelings of scarcity can have very similar impacts on our own like cognitive function as well too. There's like research that has shown that like feelings of scarcity can impact our abilities to make decisions, right? So we feel like we don't have enough, whether it's not enough money, not enough time, you don't personally feel enough, you tend to make different decisions, right? You're making decisions from a place of like feeling that you don't have, you're missing something, right? So you might be making decisions that you probably wouldn't if you were in a more grounded space. You might be feeling, also feeling very isolated, might be feeling fearful of being able to share what you feel. So scarcity also plays a role in some of the challenges that might impact us as we are doing this work. And then other pieces, so this was also shown in the BDC survey, which was like one of the number one reasons for stressors was like finances. So inflation was like specifically called out and mentioned, but like worrying about your basic needs is stressful, right? Like there's like, if we're real talk, like there's only so many like breathing exercises you can do if the money's not there, right? So like if, our finances, or if we're not able to meet our basic needs, like our social determinants of health, that is also something that can weigh heavily on our physical and mental well-being. Also, barriers to support, which I think also sometimes, unfortunately, goes hand in hand with our financial well-being too, right? So knowing that we have like a well-documented, research, all of these different things that show how much our mental well-being is important, and especially our mental well-being is important as entrepreneurs, there still is a bit of challenge in sometimes accessing resources, whether it is because they're not just available or accessible, but there's also the stigma sometimes of accessing that support, and then sometimes there's also, and a lot of times, the cost factor. Right. So things like, if you don't have your own personal insurance, for example, if you're a full-time entrepreneur, or if cost is prohibitive to that, that can play a role in being able to access different services. If you are, struggling with even asking for help, the stigma of it might prevent you in actually reaching out to get things to support your needs. So that actually is another aspect that can weigh heavily in terms of a challenge. And the last piece is like external volatility and uncertainty. And I think that is very much marked for the last 3 or 4 years, especially. I would say actually even more than that. But things like the pandemic, global conflict and crisis, inflation, all of these different things that are outside of our control that can really weigh heavy and sometimes directly impact our businesses as well. So inflation was like one of the number one reasons that were cited for last year, and will probably continue to be something very top of mind, but in terms of financial pressure, but just like also just navigating things that are outside of our control that also could weigh heavy on our mindset. So I'm going to pause there. Do any of these like resonate? Are there other stressors that can potentially impact your mental health as you're running your business, or that you've noticed, or that haven't been shared? Yes, thank you for sharing. That is a very, very great point as well too, about just like the very many roles that we play, and sometimes the pressure that comes with managing and balancing all of those different things. We have time for like one more if there's one available, or no?
Leila has shared in the group, I had the feeling of scarcity regarding job marketing needs and learn more skill. Now I say I am enough.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Yes, that makes a big difference, of just like that reframe of that you are enough, and that there is enough as well, even in the moment that it doesn't feel that way, but that having that abundance reframe does make a big difference. Okay, thank you for folks who shared and just in that reflection, but wanted to just provide an opportunity just to share some of the different things that kind of come up. It also is helpful for folks who may not have shared, but have like can say, hey, that feels familiar, that hopefully it just gives you a little bit of that reminder and assurance that you're not alone in feeling that. So we'll move on and go through kind of like what next, what are some different practices that we can do as we're navigating these different challenges. So before that, I wanted to kind of share like this quote that I absolutely love, and I think it speaks to the fact that we have lots on our shoulders, not as only as business owners, but just as humans. At the end of the day, like, we're business owners, but we're human first, right? And I think Arnon shared like a great comment about like, just having family and all these different things. Like that is a big part of what we do. But there's no glory in having any kind of grind that is also grinding us down to dust, right? So, taking that time to have different practices in place is very important, and especially in a time where we're being taxed with like lots of different challenges. So let's talk about what are some different things that we can do to take care of ourselves as we're taking care of business. Okay, so in terms of the practices, I've divided them up in about 5 different sections. So we'll walk through some practices today to support your body, so embodiment, so things for your physical health, things to help actually stay connected to how you're feeling on a regular basis, our mindset, how we can take care of just our emotional and mental health, practices that are focused on just kind of our spiritual health too, right? Just having a sense of meaning and purpose, just beyond just the work that we're doing. Also, the importance of community. That is definitely a big area that I'm very passionate about. I think for a very long time, well-being and self-care specifically has been sort of characterized as something that's very much individualized. And I think that comes a lot from sort of like the westernized lens of how wellness tends to be viewed, but it's very much rooted in terms of like community as well too, having community support, but also how we are, being in community with other people. So we'll talk a little bit about what that could look like as entrepreneurs, how you can have your own care team, who's in your care team, and also having an opportunity for providing collective support. And then we'll talk a little bit about some like grounding practices for the moments when we're overwhelmed. So these will be more of a somatic practices that are more focused on just like our body awareness, because as I mentioned before, like, it's well and good to have different things that we might have like on our roster, maybe our favorite places that we go to kind of decompress. But like when a really intense moment happens, what do you do? Like what is a thing that can help you in those like moments of dysregulation? So we'll share a few, and then open up the floor as well for any additional questions and our collective exercise. Okay, so we're first going to start off with physical well-being practices. So our physical and our, I just realized that I'm missing some, here we go. an animation. Did not realize that was still there. Okay, so our physical and our mental health are very closely connected. So things like our sleep, our nutrition, even things like hormonal shifts, like exposure to daylight. I know we've had the time change, so now it's like, if for folks who are in Canada, Ontario specifically, I'm based in Ontario, like it's dark at like 4:30 or 5 o'clock now, and that's been a very big transition. But all those things can have an impact on our mood and our thought patterns and just our overall emotional well-being as well. So this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but just a couple of things to think about when we think about caring for our bodies and how that can help with supporting our mental health. Here are a couple of reminders and practices to think about. So the first is like sleep, right? So I think that it's like an underrated thing that we can do in terms of just like helping with our physical and our mental health. So getting enough sleep is like essential for our brain health and our mental health. So it allows, that's the time where our body gets to rest, regenerate. And when we think about when we're not sleeping, like chronic sleep deprivation has been linked to things like anxiety, possibly depression. It can impact our physical health as well too. So making that time to get that rest is so important. And I think as like throughout the years, like earlier on, I used to be the person like, oh, I can just, 4 hours, 6 hours, I'm fine. But as you get older, you realize that like, our performance and just our overall vitality and well-being, we need to rest, right? So carving out that time to make sure that we're getting quality sleep is so important. And I think as part of that is thinking about just things like our sleep hygiene. So when we think about when we're actually getting ready to go to sleep, like what does that process look like? So are we winding down a little bit before we're going to sleep, or are we in our getting ready and scrolling in our beds looking at other different things, right? I'm guilty sometimes of just like spending a little time on my phone, but I'm being very intentional now of like either keeping the phone in another room or turning it off like maybe an hour before, half an hour before I go to sleep, because things like blue light can impact our ability to actually wind down and go to sleep, right? So Andrew Huberman, who is like a very famous neuroscientist now from Stanford, has a really big podcast, has some really great tips about just like different like science evidence-based backed tips and tools for caring for our well-being. And he talks actively about things like sleep and daylight exposure, but he's also mentioned that like minimizing our exposure to blue light in the evening is very important because it can impact our body's ability to produce melatonin. So that's the hormone that's released that helps us to regulate our sleep. So taking that time to just like either reduce or limit our blue light exposure, having things like blue light glasses can make a big difference. And I definitely, for myself personally, notice a big difference between if I'm like close on screens, very close to when I go to sleep versus when I'm not. The quality of sleep is different, and even just the ability to do so. The next piece is like movement. So I think the key word here is movement. I didn't say go to the gym. I didn't say like a specific type of exercise. It's really about movement that is accessible to you, right? So this is where you knowing yourself best makes sense, but it's important to just have some type of movement practice if that is accessible to you. And I think that as a practice and how it can help our physical and our mental well-being, it is some exercise and movement can help reduce stress, feelings of anxiety. It can improve our moods. It releases endorphins. So for me, my movement practice can definitely range. It could be something as like going for a walk in the morning or midday, especially now with the seasonal change and it getting darker earlier, taking that time to just like pause, go outside before it gets darker has been really helpful. And it doesn't have to be something that is like super intense, right? I think when we think movement practices have to be like, this huge routine, and it could be something as simple as making time to just like stretch if you're setting all day, for example, like getting time, stepping away from your desk and like stretching and moving and doing like different exercises in that way. If movement in terms of like walking isn't accessible, there's lots of different things like chair yogas that you can do, like stretching and things like that. So I think having an opportunity just to like move your body. And we'll talk a little about in the somatic section as well too, about just like having that body awareness of like how we feel in our body is important, but just taking that time to carve out a particular practice that feels accessible to you, something that you enjoy even, can make big wonders and strides in how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis. And it's definitely something that helps me as someone who kind of struggles with depression and anxiety. Like that's a really great anchor for me on the days where I feel like I don't really want to do much, but I can like go out for a walk and it can like easily help me feel that things can feel a little bit like more manageable throughout the day. Next piece is like our nutrition, right? So I am not a proponent of like different, things like, but I will say, just for paying attention to what we eat can have a significant aspect on our mood. So like certain foods, like things like containing omega-3s, for example, can like help with our mood and cognitive function. So if we're spending our day kind of getting it through with like caffeine, for example, may not be the best thing to help, right? So just like paying attention to how you feel after eating certain things as well too, I think is part of like your nutrition, right? Some folks are able to like have two coffees and be fine, and it doesn't, it's still, they feel fine. Others can have a sip of coffee and is like, no, immediately no, right? So like figuring out like what are the things that actually help you feel your best? What are things that don't make you feel so good? What are things that are actually, learning and researching different foods that can actually help and support your mood, support your well-being, that don't actually exacerbate stress, would be really helpful as well. And then next piece, hydration. So it's like staying hydrated throughout the day is super important. Also for brain function, in terms of just like having that time to actually just drink water. Like you can essentially go a whole day, sometimes a couple hours, and just like not leave your desk, not have food, not drink, and then realize like, hey, why is my head hurting? Why am I feeling tired? And it's probably because you haven't had any water, you haven't hydrated. So just taking that time in that moment to pause and like focus in on the hydration and nutrition, really key. And it's like a really easy and accessible way to focus in on physical and mental health. And then I mentioned a little bit about sun exposure, so I'll kind of like go over that one. But essentially now that, especially now with the change in season, and like seasonal self-care can be its own conversation, but like taking that time just to get a little bit of like outside and outdoor time can make a big difference. And I know in some cases, like during the time and in the fall, we can become more deficient in vitamin D. So with that, I would say, talk to like your healthcare provider to see if that's something that makes sense to supplement with vitamin D. But, getting outside and outdoors when the sun's out is also a great way to be able to do that. And then lastly is like our somatic. So many of us, we learn to kind of live from like the neck up, just very much like thinking, focusing on just like getting through the day. We have lots on our mind. We have a lot of things to think about. And in doing so, it's very easy to kind of disconnect with like how we're feeling throughout the day, right? It's kind of like when you see sort of that message to sort of like unclench your jaw, release your shoulders, and then you don't even realize you're doing it until you see it, right? So somatic awareness, it allows us to kind of just like, see our bodies as like a site of intelligence, allows us to kind of like take a minute to pause and tune in and to be like, how am I actually feeling? What does like certain sensations or different emotions actually feel and show up in my body, right? It could be like tightness. My shoulders might get tight. I might feel a pain, like I might feel headaches when I'm feeling really anxious or feeling, overwhelmed. So it's like taking a moment to kind of like check in with ourselves and see like what are different sensations you might be feeling, especially with different strong emotions, and how does that show up in my body? What is this like? How does it? And when you feel those different things, like how do you respond in addition to that? So in the next slide, I'll talk a little more about that as a quick example. I wanted to share a question if folks feel comfortable. So I wanted, the first part is like a quote from Brene Brown, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm feeling my emotions at a 10, paying attention to them at about a 5, and understand them about a 2, which I think kind of relates to sometimes how it is. It's like we might be feeling all the things, not really know exactly what we're feeling, but we're not also paying attention to it either. Just kind of like, it's there, I just got to push through and like, kind of go with it. So having the opportunity to kind of like Emotions sometimes are not solely like mental experiences, like we also feel them in our body. So example, anxiety might manifest in like tightness in our chest or knots in our stomach. Joy might also feel like a warm sensation in our heart. We might feel like really excited, right? So by paying attention to the bodily sensations, we can give like insight into the emotions, and it can help us like with processing how we're feeling, what different actions that we want to take. So and get like somatic practices can range like things like a body scan, like meditation, right? Like taking a moment to kind of just like do a meditation of just like feeling different sensations in your body, being more aware of like what's happening, what you're feeling, um, and allows us to kind of approach that with like curiosity, not with judgment, just to kind of see like, well, okay, what am I noticing right now? What am I feeling right now? Like where is this feeling actually happening, this sensation actually happening? So question for folks is like, what sensations do you notice when you feel like you need to rest, or when you notice that you're stressed? Like what are some of the things that are kind of the, hey, like I'm kind of noticing something myself? Like what are those things for you? And it's okay if you're not sure, like that's part of it as well too. It's a practice, but like if you are aware, what are some things that if you feel comfortable sharing?
All right, a couple of responses in the chat. Anxiousness. I notice that I mostly react and not respond. Yawning, eyes feel heavy. Frustration, tension, tired, clenching my jaw, headaches, burning eyes, dry eyes and tenseness. My back starts to hurt, scattered, weak, and frustrated. Make unnecessary errors.
Mhm.
Brain does not work. Uh, Neck and back pain from stress. Must leave space now.
Must leave space.
Yeah, must leave space now. Hassan, would you want to explain that one?
Thank you, Alina. Yes, it means that when I'm really exhausted, then I don't want to work and I want to just leave my place where I was working.
Got it, got it.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Errors, stiff neck, painful back, stiff shoulders,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
impatience.
Patience. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I love that there was a mix of like, the actual feeling, but also recognizing sometimes how that manifests in like actions or moods. And
Yeah.
I think that's part of like doing that somatic awareness is like it is an invitation to ask a few more questions. It's like, okay, I'm here, I'm feeling this thing, but like, what is the thought or that's associated with that, or what is the action that this is resulting in as well too? And it allows us to so for example, like that impatience, it allows us to kind of be like, okay, maybe this is an opportunity to ground, reset, or ask myself, what do I need in this moment to help me to feel a bit more recentered, to help me kind of feel a bit more regulated in this moment. But so I think even with the feeling, we can often put a lot of judgment of like, I'm feeling this different thing, or this is really bad, or it's not about good or bad. It's about like taking a moment to like get out of the mind or even sometimes the distraction of like not feel not even acknowledging it at all, and acknowledging that it's there and allowing it to be an invitation to kind of like see what is actually, how can I actually address this emotion and that's a sensation that is being present right now, and also see like what does my body and my mind need right now, that how can I help and serve and get to it. So Trisha Hersey, who's like the author of a great book called like Rest is Resistance, she often says that like the body is this is the space and this of liberation. And I truly believe that, because it can allow us to liberate ourselves from just like a lot of these different feelings of like feeling constrained and different things. It has a lot of wisdom that sits within us. And a great book also that talks more about this is Decolonizing the Body, because we often are sort of like being go, 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 having to just kind of push through, do the thing, ignore this, work through the impatience or the tightening and all of the different things, but it allows us to kind of say, no, we're going to pause and use this as an opportunity to kind of show like, what am I feeling? What is this telling me now? What do I need right now? What do I need to give myself right now? So I think that somatic awareness, in addition to like the movement practices, like the sunlight and all this different stuff, so important because we are with ourselves 24/7, right? And we don't want to make sure that like we're kind of ignoring those different signs because there's so much wisdom in our body that is like, supporting us and can lead to different things that we're not even noticing. Or it might be kind of signs and invitations that is telling us of where we want to focus in on our attention. Okay, so thank you again for folks who shared so openly. Let's transition now into like mindful practices. So for this one, I'm only going to share 2 practices. There's so many different ones, but want to get through all the different sections, and also this is also about you as well to share some things that work as well in community. So the first piece is self-compassion. So as like, higher performer folks who are creating things like entrepreneurs are folks who are essentially see and have visions that others don't see. And with that, oftentimes putting very high expectations and pressure on ourselves, and can be critical if we don't meet those expectations, even if nobody was expecting us to, right? So practicing like self-compassion is essentially allowing us to treat ourselves with kindness and understanding, especially in those moments when things don't go to plan. Especially in those moments where things feel very challenging. And it allows us as well to connect to a larger humanity that other people are also experiencing hard and challenging times as well too. So one way to recognize where we might be lacking self-compassion is to ask yourself, like, if you spoke to yourself spoke to others the way that maybe you speak to yourself from like a self-talk lens, would you have friends? Would the person you're speaking to, would they still want to talk to you, right? Like that's a good way of like being able to gauge your level of self-compassion, or maybe there might be areas where you might be lacking. So for myself, I can share that like self-compassion, self-talk is definitely something that I've struggled with over the years, and having sort of that like self-critical voice, right? And realizing doing the work in terms of like reading more about self-compassion and the research, like Dr. Kristen Neff is like a thought leader, developed kind of the definition and has like thousands of articles and research about self-compassion. But it really is focusing in on the way that we treat ourselves, the way we treat others, but realizing that we have a common humanity, that we're not the only person who's going through these different things. And I'll talk through the next couple slides, like what are some different practices that we can do to be able to give ourselves a bit more grace. And I think that's definitely something that we need to do in this time, especially when there's lots of like stressors and pressures of things that are outside of our control. And, feeling the need to have a handle on so many different things when it's just not possible. Allowing ourselves to take a step back and just give ourselves a bit of that grace can make a world of difference. So the second piece, this one is also, I wanted to include this one as a way to sort of combat the earlier thing that I mentioned about the struggle of dealing with like hustle culture, or the beliefs that we constantly have to be on and working and be productive and things like that. So taking that time to do kind of like, a values and reflection check-in, getting to understand, what are the things that you're working towards, and like also to kind of understand your own beliefs about just like taking breaks, rest. What are the values that you have personally and within your business? Do you feel like those are showing up for you on a regular basis? Because like having that values mismatch, if you feel like maybe you're working on something or working in a way that is out of alignment with your values, can impact our well-being, because we feel like we're kind of pushing against something that doesn't align with how we're feeling and can be a risk, is actually one of the risk factors for burnout, just values mismatch. So taking that time to just sort of like check in with yourself to kind of see like what values that you have, are they showing up in your business? Do you feel like you're working in a way that's working in alignment with the values that you have? thinking about kind of your own thoughts and feelings and definition about like work and rest. How you define success is another good example as well too. Like a success defined solely within how successful your business is, and then success could be in terms of like money that you're making, accolades, or is it defined in just like how much you're learning, different other factors, other intrinsic factors that might not necessarily be tied to productivity metrics or actual metrics about your finances and different things. So all those different factors can like be helpful as a grounding presence to sort of unpack like what are some of the different things that are your motivators, and seeing if they're still serving you in this time. So let's talk a little bit more about self-compassion though. So self-compassion is something that can feel very challenging, but it is something that's worth it. So it is good for both our physical and our mental health, because like having an actual self-critical inner dialogue can actually activate our body's like stress response, like our fight, flight, or freeze response. It can create like literal feelings of stress. It's almost like your body's attacking itself. Like when we practice self-compassion, however, it activates the care system, which is like our parasympathetic nervous system, which gives us a sense of safety and security. Right. So research has shown that like self-compassion, like the practice of self-compassion is actually something that can help us with cultivating resilience. It is something that can help us combat like shame. And it's something that can actually that can lead to better immune function, better habits. There's been studies that have shown that folks who are more self-compassionate tend to be, very strong in terms of like leadership, being able to actually take really good care of themselves in terms of being more mindful of like supporting their physical well-being as well too. It could also make you a stronger leader. So it's and stronger in the sense of being willing to be vulnerable, right? So when we're self-compassionate, we're probably more likely to be okay with admitting our limitations, because we recognize that we're not alone in the fact that we're experiencing something that's challenging. And especially if we are, either working in an organization or for building teams, having that ability to demonstrate vulnerability is something that is vital for creating like psychological safety, right? Which is something that's vital for our well-being as well. And then lastly, it can also strengthen having a growth mindset, right? It allows us to kind of, pull ourselves out of, or at least not necessarily always pull ourselves completely, but like it allows us to be able to kind of see other aspects and reframe. So as somebody mentioned earlier before about like feeling of scarcity, but then making the adjustment of like, I'm enough, right? Allowing us to see like, hey, I'm actually feeling something challenging right now, but I can acknowledge that and also still see, even though I'm experiencing this challenge, I can still be able to proceed through. So here's kind of a couple of examples that I wanted to share from like Dr. Kristen Neff about when we say self-compassion, it could feel like, okay, like how do I actually do that? Right? Like, what does that actually mean? It's like, yeah, be your own best friend, but how? Right? Like, what do I say to myself? What do I do? So here are a couple of like practices that are directly from The Art of Self-Compassion from Dr. Kristen Neff, in terms of like, how can you actually practice self-compassion beyond just saying, hey, good job, you can do it? So the first is like physical touch. So with this, you can access kind of like the benefits of like self-compassion at like any given moment. You don't have to have like a certain, you can set dedicated time, but you can actually, in a moment of like stress, you can be able to access self-compassion. So as an example, let's say you're like having an exhausting meeting, exhausting day, maybe you're in the middle of like a difficult conversation. From a physical touch perspective, just the act of like intentionally like, putting one hand on the other forearm, for example, or just kind of like giving yourself a bit of like an embrace, like a hug, can also, the same way that you would kind of like be able to console like a family member or a friend, and adding a little bit of that pressure can also help with just like activating that feeling of safety, right? And like different, Dr. Kristen Neff has even said that even in just doing that act of physical touch and like adding on like a saying, for example, of just like, hey, this is a really tough moment right now, or I just need a moment, can also be helpful to just sort of be able to let your body know and your mind know that you're safe in this moment. The second piece is just like labeling the emotion. So like one way of like enhancing feelings of self-compassion is to like learn to label our emotional state. So at the top, I kind of shared the feelings wheel, which is kind of like my kind of favorite place to sort of default beyond just like, different like, sayings of like how I'm actually feeling. Um, Sometimes I'd be like, I'm okay, I'm fine, but oftentimes there's another emotion underneath. So taking that time to kind of just like get a little deeper in terms of like what are the emotions that are coming up for you, and it could look like tracking that in a journal if that's something. There's also different apps. I've experimented with different apps where I kind of like check in to see like different emotions of like how I'm feeling throughout the day as a really great way, and like adding a little bit of like journal and reflection entry to kind of go along with that to sort of share like how I was feeling in that moment. And then there are also exercises about taking like a compassion break. So that is like on the right side of the screen, kind of outlined a bit of like what that could look like. So it essentially breaks down 3 parts of self-compassion, which is practicing mindfulness, which starts with like, just being fully present with the discomfort, making a statement of acknowledging that it's challenging, that it's hard, acknowledging common humanity. So that is essentially reminding yourself that you're not alone in how you're feeling, and that there are other people in the broader community who are also experiencing, suffering or discomfort, and that you also in experiencing that brings you, in closer community to knowing that you're not alone. And then just offering yourself some level of kindness, right? So just saying something kind to yourself, a reminder. Sometimes in the moment, it's like for myself, might just need someone to tell you that, and that's okay as well too. But I think just having like a framework to remember that, just like practicing that self-compassion is like super helpful. And as an entrepreneur, it will serve us well for the moments where we have kind of those dips and valleys of letting us know that you're not alone in how you're feeling. Okay, next piece is community. So with community, I think when we think about self-care, there's often kind of this belief that is very much intertwined with being self-reliant. So on here, I had this quote from an author. Her name is Anna Borges, who's written a book called The More or Less Definitive Guide to Self-Care. And I think it's a really great quote that sums up the importance of community. So I'll just read it here quickly, which is, none of us has the capacity to soothe all that ails us on our own. Self-care is as much about opening yourself up to the many ways that others can help you as it is about taking care of yourself. It's about educating yourself on resources, giving yourself permission to access professional help without shame, and asking for what you need. So I think it was just like important when we think about community that oftentimes we might think, or just self-care, I should say, or wellness, or taking care of yourself. It's also always a lot, oftentimes framed in terms of what we have to do on our own, right? It's very much about individualism, or this belief that it's up to you to figure it out. Like I've also worked in organizations where there'd be so much tension. Just as a background, I've worked in organizations where kind of leading kind of well-being strategy and different things, and working with leaders who'd be like, well, why do we have to provide all these different wellness things? And it's like, or it's up to them to figure it out. And it's very much about understanding that collectively, there's also aspects that community need to help us as well too in terms of our well-being. There are certain things that we'll never be able to only support on our own, and we need to have the power of community and collective to be able to help in supporting some of our needs, and it makes a very big difference. So I think that I wanted to include an aspect of just like, what does your community care look like in supporting your mental health, especially when we think about the fact that like isolation and loneliness is like super key. What does your care team look like? what are some of the things that maybe might be lacking or that you might want to add to your care team? And what are some things that your community actually pours into you that you may knowingly or unknowingly don't know that actually does make an impact on your well-being? So we'll talk about that quickly. So first thing is like, who is on your care team? So your care team is essentially, the folks or beings or things. Because if you notice on the slide, it's not always, a person, but like, what are the things that can support you on your mental health and your well-being journey? So first is like, it could be just trusted professionals. So this could range from like, it could be therapists, could be coaches, doctors, somatic practitioners. Those are the people that maybe you turn to that are play a big role in supporting your well-being. It could be like your person, your people, friends, family, somebody that's like a trusted resource, and you're having challenging moments or even in joyful moments, that they're there to support you. Those different people in your lives, like who are the folks that you run to when you're super excited, or you might need a different additional support, knowing who those individuals are for you. I have like your biz besties or your peers or your mentors or your like business colleagues even, right? Like who are the community of folks that that you can speak with, who are kind of your personal advisory board, maybe just to workshop different business challenges, but even maybe just life stuff, who understand it, understand you from the situation of being an entrepreneur, that you have that community that you can also collaborate and work with even too, right, in your day to day. And I also wanted to put other different things that sometimes are not often as thought of as part of our care team. But, our ancestors, right? Like the ancestral wisdom that you might have. Maybe there are folks who are no longer here, but also are, a point of guidance for you, that there are folks that you lean into their wisdom. And they might be folks who are in your family, or they might be folks that are kind of like distant ancestors or people that you admire, right? So for me, kind of my distant sort of ancestors or folks who remind me about importance of well-being that I kind of lean on are like Audre Lorde, like Toni Morrison, different folks who are just like amazing, like very steady voices who made like huge strides in terms of the importance of seeing like wellness and well-being and self-care as a point of like liberation and resistance. Those are also folks that I kind of lean on as well too, in challenging moments, or even moments too that I need when I have to think about the importance of like rest and joy. Could be like things like your pets, right? Like they're emotional support animals for a reason, right? So, like sometimes our pets can be sources of support or places where we can kind of just like regulate and take that moment and break. Nature as well can be a site of a space of a part of our care team. It can be a place of just like spiritual connection for a lot of times, just getting outside and being in nature. And then yourself as well too, right? Working that way. It might not feel that way right now, but we can also be as part of our care team, right? Because again, you know yourself the best and you're with yourself, and that you eventually as well can be somebody that you can lean on as well. So want to ask you, like, who are some of the folks on your care team? And do you have a care team? Or did you realize that you maybe have one, didn't know it?
Parents, Sarah saying my dog, girlfriends for walks, friends, family, dogs, nature,
All good ones.
my partners, friends, colleagues, therapist, wife, my brother, kids, counselors, all great answers. Family, my bestie, therapist, sociotherapist, chiropractor.
I love that. Yeah. I think it's great as well too, just to when we think about our care team, or even when we think about, okay, who's sort of in my corner, sometimes, especially if we're thinking about it from only a work perspective, we think, well, okay, my family doesn't know what I do, or like, they may not be able to help me from a business perspective, but like they're helping in other ways, right? Or your girlfriends might be the place that you go for your walks that help you decompress from, from all the things that are happening, or help you to be able to feel that sense of joy of just like going out and being in nature. Your pets are there to just kind of soothe you. So I think that this is also a helpful way, because sometimes I know like it can get really, okay, no one really understands, or I can't go to this person, but like, and there one person can't be for everything, but it just is helpful to let us know that we have some folks in our circle. And I think also the inclusion of just like the ancestors, or even like the distant like folks who may be like mentors in your head or virtual mentors, are also helpful as well too, that we can lean into within our team. So I hope that is just another reminder of just like that you got some folks, and it's important as we're thinking about just our care practices that you don't have to go it alone, and that there are some folks that are here for you. Okay, we're almost at the end with spiritual, and then the over the grounding practices, the overwhelm practices. So I wanted to include just like spiritual well-being as well too, because I think that it's often like an overlooked aspect of just like our health and our mental well-being, our overall well-being. And like I think it's important to note that when we say like spiritual well-being, it's not only limited to prayer. I think that's one aspect of things, but like spiritual wellness practices are things that can help us connect to a deeper sense of purpose, meaning, and hope. And I think like right now, like that's something that just I think has become probably pushed to the forefront of just like feeling a sense of like meaning, hope in this time. Like what are like beyond just the work that we're doing, who are we doing it for? What is the larger purpose of things? How do we stay connected to things? How do we stay connected beyond just the work, and having other things that can help engage us in play and creativity is also something that can do wonders for just like our outlook and just our overall like day-to-day sense of well-being, right? So it can be things like ranging from, as I mentioned, like prayer can be one thing, but it could be even looking at things like how you can bring about creativity and curiosity and wisdom into your life. It could be about strengthening your relationship to yourself and the world around you. It could be looking about finding a higher, guiding path to make things feel a little bit easier on your day to day. And that could look like, religion practices or religious practices. It could be nature. For some people, it's astrology. It could be setting intentions, a whole range of different things, somatic practices. So spiritual well-being enables us to like tap into something beyond ourselves, right? And I think that could be something that could feel very, very powerful, in terms of just our overall well-being, and help us feel a bit more grounded and centered as we're on sort of this journey of like different like roller coasters and different things like that. So I've listed a couple of different things. I won't spend too much time on it, but I wanted to list a couple of examples. So of what, spiritual well-being practices could look like. So having a deeper spiritual connection. So again, that could be, connecting to whatever higher power that is present within your life. So for some entrepreneurs or individuals, they might find solace, connecting, to, your spiritual beliefs. We might all have different beliefs, and it could be meditation, it could be prayer, it could be attending different services. So just like whatever that spiritual connection that makes sense and has a sense of peaceful and grounding presence for you is what that would look like in terms of practice. Nature, nature is something that is also very much deeply connected to our spiritual well-being, right? So activities like, hiking, camping, just going out in nature, taking walks in nature, having the opportunity to just be like surrounded by just this amazing and vast presence that allows you to just kind of, see something bigger and outside of yourself. Play and creativity. Like, what does play look like? Do we make time for play? Do we make time for like things that are creative beyond just creating things in our business? Right. So what does that look like in having that space to have like that unstructured time that is just for, being creative and being playful? Maybe that might look like having like a hobby that might not be monetized, you know, like something that just is just for you, for a space to be able to experiment with different things. I think that's also important as well. And then having like some space for reflection, or even building like a gratitude practice, or other ways that we can engage in spiritual well-being practices. And then lastly, I wanted to share a couple of somatic practices for the days when we feel overwhelmed. So, as I mentioned before, like a lot of times, you know, especially with a lot of the practices that I shared, it's oftentimes, you know, things that we make time for, that we prioritize, but like in the moment, sometimes we might be just activated. And it's like, how do we take that moment to kind of ground and like be able to reset, pause, kind of come back into present moment. So wanted to share a couple of practices that are help support our nervous system on those moments where you can't get up and go to a yoga class, or, you know, step away and meditate and do like a 5 or 10 minute meditation. You know, what are some like accessible resources that might be available to you? So a couple of things that I mentioned on the slide are like, first being orienting. So orienting is just like essentially a somatic practice of being able to help redirect and ground your attention back to the present moment. So you might be feeling something maybe distressing, or just kind of feeling like, okay, like not really present. And you need a moment to kind of just like redirect your energy. So this exercise is really simple about, maybe you can do it within the space that you're in, if you're in your room, if you're outside. And it's just about orienting yourself back to your environment. So it's as simple as just like taking some time, taking like a deep breath, like taking an inhale, taking a breath back out, and just like, you know, let your gaze sort of scan your environment, you know, just taking a look to see what are some things like that are present, what are maybe some things that are in your environment that are bits that make you feel more grounded or safe, that maybe spark, you know, good, sort of like good memories and things like that. If you're outside, it could be as simple as just like, you know, taking the time, very similar to the grounding exercise of like, what are 5 things that I can see? What are 4 things that I can hear? You know, 3 things I feel, just like taking the time to kind of just like stop and recenter, remind your body to slow down, to kind of just that you're safe, and just to kind of reorient and ground yourself back. And then it allows you to just then be able to take a moment to then decide the next action. So it's not going to immediately like solve the whatever might be happening, but it's a moment to just kind of, you know, pause, slow down, take a breath, and be able to just reorient and ground yourself back to, you know, okay, I'm okay. Let's now decide the next immediate action that I need to take, or what is like, you know, what is the next thing that I need to do. Other things that are another practice is like a discharging energy practice. So this sometimes might feel strange in the moment, but it's like a practice to be able to just kind of discharge just like excess energy. So for me, this tends to be really helpful when I have like very heavy days where it's very talk heavy, where I might have to be having like very intense conversations about just like different aspects in my role of like well-being, or just different things, maybe listening to folks kind of share really heavy stories. And it's like, I want to be able to just like discharge just like the emotion of feeling lots of different things, or just be able to kind of reset my energy. So that could just be like movement, kind of just taking, you know, the time to sort of just like almost even shaking it off. It feels like a little strange in the moment, but it's an opportunity to just kind of like reset your state essentially. So it's another somatic practice of just being able to discharge that feeling. And then the next piece is the psychological or physiological sigh, which I have a quick video from Andrew Huberman that kind of walks through it. But essentially it talks about just, you know, a breath work practice, and like the scientific aspect of taking long exhales it sends kind of that signals to your heart to be able to like slow down and just pause. So I'll see if this video works quickly, and we'll just kind of go from there. I don't know if it's showing up though. Is it playing, Alina?
Yeah, it's paused now, but it was playing.
Okay.
A few years ago, when my laboratory got interested in studying stress in humans, we asked ourselves, what are the patterns of breathing that allow for the most rapid reduction in stress levels? And more importantly, what are the patterns of breathing that can be done in real time so that people can adjust their stress while they're still engaging in life, right? Breathwork classes, running off to Esalen for a weekend is a magical experience, but life demands pressing on you. That's typically when you feel stress. So it is still true that vacation, long meditation retreats, and massages or a nice drink, if you're of drinking age, still work, but they're slow and they take you offline. The physiological sigh is a pattern of breathing that was actually discovered by physiologists in the 30s, and that was essentially rediscovered by Professor Jack Feldman at UCLA, a world expert in the neurobiology of respiration, and by my colleague Mark Krasno at Stanford, who studies lung function. The physiological sigh is a pattern of breathing that we all engage in deep sleep when levels of carbon dioxide in our bloodstream get too high. We, or our dogs, you can see your dog do this, will do a double inhale followed by an extended exhale. Children or adults for that matter that are sobbing and lose their breath, so to speak, will also do a double inhale exhale. That's the spontaneous execution of what we call the physiological sigh. The reason it works so well to relax us is because it offloads a lot of carbon dioxide all at once. And the way it works is the following. Our lungs are not just two big bags of air. We have all these little millions of sacs of air that if we were to lay them out flat, they would be as big as about a tennis court or so. The volume of air, therefore, and the volume of carbon dioxide that we can offload is tremendously high, except that we get stressed as carbon dioxide builds up on our bloodstream, and it's kind of a double whammy, these little sacs deflate. Now, when we do a double inhale, so I'll do this now twice through my nose, or you could do this, or you could do it through your mouth, but it works best through the nose. It's inhale, and then you sneak a little bit more air in at the very end. When you do that, you reinflate those little sacs. And when you exhale, then you discard all the carbon dioxide at once. So the simple way to describe this protocol is that unless you are underwater, you do a double inhale followed by an extended exhale, and you offload the maximum amount of carbon dioxide. And we found in our laboratory, and other laboratories have found, that just 1, 2, or 3 of those physiological sighs brings your level of stress down very, very fast. And it's a tool that you can use anytime. I do hope that people will kind of watch other people or dogs as they start to relax or go down to sleep. You'll see this pattern of breathing, but again, it can be consciously driven. The other thing about breathing, and the reason why exhales are so vital, is the following. I know there's a lot of interest nowadays in heart rate variability. Well, most people don't realize this, but your breathing is actually driving heart rate variability. So when you inhale, this dome-shaped muscle beneath your lungs, your diaphragm, actually moves down because the lungs expand, it moves down. When you do that, you create more space in the thoracic cavity, and the heart gets a little bigger, it actually expands. As a consequence, blood flows more slowly through that larger volume, and the brain quickly sends a signal down to the heart to speed the heart up. The short, simple version of this is inhales speed the heart up. When you exhale, the opposite is true. That dome-shaped muscle, the diaphragm, moves up. The space in your thoracic cavity gets a little bit smaller. The heart gets a little bit smaller. Blood moves more quickly through that small volume, and the brain sends a signal to the heart to slow the heart down. Physicians know this as respiratory sinus arrhythmia, but this is the basis of what we call HRV, heart rate variability. And the simple way to remember this is anytime you emphasize exhales, in other words, making them longer than your inhales, you are slowing the heart rate down, you're calming your system. Anytime you emphasize inhales, you make them more vigorous or longer than your exhales, you're speeding up your heart.
Okay, so that's a lot of information. Andrew Huberman is very scientific, as you can see, but I think it gives some good context and insight about just how breathing is such an accessible practice, and that sometimes we just don't even notice how just the simple act of just our inhales and exhales have the ability to speed up our heart rate or lower our heart rate. So I think it's a great practice, as you mentioned, just when those moments of overwhelm, when you can't necessarily like escape to, nature or different things, that, just taking that time to check in with your breathing. Play that again. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so I actually want to like pause here and do a little bit of a collective exercise here. So I shared a few different practices, but as I mentioned before, this is also about community and collective. And like all of us have, I think, different things that we hold dear to ourselves in terms of, our non-negotiables for taking care of ourselves, or we might be here looking for different things, to try or to see what might be working for other folks. So I have on here on screen a mentee. So there's a couple ways to join. You can either go to mentee.com and then enter in the code, and there's a space between the 7410, there's a space between those two numbers, or you can scan if you have your phone accessible or close to you, a smartphone, you can scan the QR code to be able to share your responses. So the question is like, what are like a well-being or self-care practice that you never regret making time for? So those like things you never regret making time for often are like clues of the things that we hold dear, that we have become, our non-negotiables. But we have those things also that we know that we do, that we know will contribute positively to our mental health and our well-being, right? So what are those things for you? I just wanted to put together a little like word cloud that can hopefully share and like provide some inspiration of like, what are some things that we're already doing that is helping and resourcing and helping us. I think a lot of times, especially when we're feeling exhausted or overwhelmed, or times when it's really hard, we often forget some of the things that we might already be doing, or the things that we do enjoy doing that we haven't really been able to make time for or had the energy for. And it's often tends to be a good reminder. So we'll take a moment to do that. For folks who have scanned or gotten access, are you able to access the mentee? Yes, okay. So I think I have to stop sharing and try to share that screen. Just give me a second. See things coming in. It's just. All right. Okay. Shout out to the people who put emojis. I love that. Okay. So this is being updated in real time. So here are a couple of things that are popping up on screen here. And we can see it's like changing, but meditation looks like to be the most popular thing that's popping up. So the thing that is the largest is what is the word or the phrase or the practice that has the most votes or the same consistency in people and what people are saying. But I love to see, like, so I'll read out a couple, and then if there's some folks who may have not put into the mentee or had trouble accessing, I'd love if you could also enter it into the chat as well too. So I'll read out a couple of different things. I love to see what are some of these things. A lot of them are also practices that we talked about today. So meditation, making time for sleep, writing with an emoji, shout out to you. Breathing exercises, taking time to discharge, which is great. Vacations, therapy, gratitude journal, taking a walk. I see Sura Namaskar. I hope I pronounced that right. For the person who wrote that, I would love to know what that is, if you feel comfortable sharing. Self-care, being with family members, bubble baths, yoga, energy from the sun, massages, listening to music, religious, spiritual practices, watching your favorite shows. That's always fun. good sleep hygiene, praying. Are there any other ones in the chat, Alina? No? Let's see if we change them. Okay, there's more meditation. Okay, amazing. All right. All right, if there's nothing in the chat, I can move on. But I think that this was like a good way to just sort of remind. Oh, did you, Alina, were you going to say something?
No,
No? Okay.
all
Sorry,
good.
I saw you moved your hand. Okay. Yeah, so the quick word cloud was just like, as I mentioned, a way to just sort of remind, like, here are some of the things that might be practices that we know are things that are working and that we need, that we love doing, that we are sort of our non-negotiables, that we never regret making time for, the things that actually help and nourish. But also, I think it's also great to see that just the consistency of like folks who also have similar practices, but other maybe, hopefully, maybe there might be some new practices on here that you haven't tried yet, or that you might be curious to try. So when it comes to sort of the different things that we do to take care of ourselves, it's very much about practice, trying new things on. So, feel free to take a screenshot of this, or, just to kind of take in mind that there's lots of different things that are available in terms of what you can do to support yourself holistically. But also, if this is something that maybe, hopefully for sometimes it might be a reminder of like, hey, I actually haven't made that time to go for the walk, or to do my favorite like prayer or meditation and things like that. So I often, when I have those times to sort of check in about what are the things that really help me, sometimes it's a good sort of tripwire to remember, I actually haven't made time to do that, or I haven't, or I've been struggling to fit that in, or I haven't been feeling up to doing those things. And it can also help as a way to kind of figure out, like, how can I carve out that space to be able to do so? I still see it changing. I love that. So thanks for folks who are still making the update. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the slide. So we're almost at the end. All right. Okay, so before I wrap up, I wanted to leave a couple of reminders and also a resource guide for all of you as well too. So I walked through a couple of practices. You also shared your practices, but I also wanted to put together a quick resource guide of other, not only just practices, but resources that can help support you on your journey, just as an entrepreneur, but specifically with your well-being. So within this resource guide, you could either access it through the bit.ly link, copying that link, or scanning. Alina is also going to send a copy out with the recording as well too, if you aren't able to grab it right now. But essentially within that doc, I've put together a couple of resources with respect to different community tools that are available in terms of that are available to support your well-being, as well as things like low cost or free therapy and counseling resources. So there are a number of different things that are available in terms of therapy and practitioner support, resources for self-guided coaching, self-guided wellness resources, as well as virtual care offerings. So if you are needing to connect with different practitioners, whether they're mental health practitioners or even just family doctors or things like that. So it has access to different tools that will enable you to do that as well too. So in that document, you'll be able to just get a couple of resources as well that will hopefully help and support you on your journey. Try to make it as well as accessible as possible in terms of just like different lists that are available for therapy and practitioners and different groups. So hopefully that is also helpful. And I think the last thing is just like remembering that it's okay to ask for help as well too. As much as like we have our different practices and our anchors, sometimes we just need some additional support, you know, like sometimes there's only so much breathing you can do, and you might just need to, you know, talk with a therapist or a coach or a professional or different things. So also wanted to leave that as a reminder of like knowing that there's no shame and just like being able to raise your hand for that support, being held in community. And I hope that some of the tools within the resource guide also provide that outlet and that reminder as well too. And I think that, you know, continuing to come to Y-Space, hopefully to connect with colleagues on this call as well, also super important in building your care team. All right, last thing I want to leave you with is one of my quotes from one of my fave ancestors, Toni Morrison, that you are your best thing, right? So without all the things that we're doing at the end of the day, like it's not possible without our well-being, without us, right? So hopefully today's presentation either served as a reminder, maybe hopefully spark some new thoughts, new things, maybe to take a time to arrive, take time to just decompress. Maybe it's the start of the journey, maybe it's the continuation of the journey, but I hope that the journey will continue to be a lifelong one. So wishing you the best as you continue, not only with Y-Space, but with all of your future endeavors, that you feel a sense of steadiness through the waves that we are experiencing, you know, in the world right now. So thank you so much. And as we wrap up, I also wanted to leave another question because I think that, as I mentioned before, collective and community is important. And I think it'd be nice to end on, you know, leaving some words of encouragement for each other in the chat, right? So thinking about like, you know, your fellow peers that are here, and maybe thinking about what is maybe something you would hope that someone would say to you, or an encouraging word that you want to leave for someone else, you know, feel free to offer that in the chat right now, and then we can pause. And if there's any questions, happy to answer. But thank you so much for your engagement.
Thank you, Siobhan. This was amazing, honestly. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your resources. Really, really appreciate it. What we're going to do is, I'm thinking.